I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds, yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. I just throw back off a Roxy. Quit the talking, me and bro stay locked in. Me and bro stay locked in.
Did you ever want to make some extra money as a producer or just branch out and learn new things in music, then searched up how to mix vocals, and all that came up was either somebody that mixed with FL stock plugins only, not even showing the vocal chain, but telling you to buy it, or a tutorial with some extremely old, out-of-date, like trash country song, or a producer slash beatmaker trying to show you how to properly mix and master.
Well.
You would assume the last point about me, but what most of y'all don't know is that
I've been mixing and mastering songs even before I started making beats. Like, I think I was 13 when I started, and my shit was sounding completely garbage, like trash.
Yeah, I'm just fine, yeah, fine, yeah.
I guess everybody gotta start somewhere, but today I purposely picked out a very simple, modern song example to break down everything I did from start to end as easy as possible, going from the first stage, preamp and vocal cleanup, to the second stage, the vocal chain, third stage, the sense effects, making the vocal sound more 3D and smoothing it out, to then fourth, the vocal properly sitting in the beat, and the simple but effective mastering chain, making sure the song is loud enough and has no annoying or overly present frequencies. Now before we get into it, you know what to do. And although I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible in this video, this is a rather advanced tutorial, so if you don't know anything about engineering whatsoever, I will link the best video I've ever watched about basic vocal mixing techniques in the description for you to watch first. But without further ado, starting off with probably the most important chapter, being the preamp slash vocal cleanup stage. Now the very most important thing is that the vocal is recorded properly. Before mixing, your vocal waveform should roughly look like this. If it doesn't, just turn it down or turn it up. And as you can see when playing the rough vocal, we got a lot of headroom left to work with. Now because most people nowadays don't record in the studio where they have expensive gear, preamps, and like a perfect recording condition, you have to kind of treat the vocal a little bit before going into the mixing stage. Mixed by Ali always said this, like the basement of your vocal has to be right to build a house on top of it, which just perfectly applies to mix. First we have to make sure that all the noise is removed, so for that I simply just use the NS1 stereo. Since it's so simple, turn this up to about like 5, 10. If this doesn't help fully remove the background noise, you will have to use the RX Spectral denoise. And what you want to do with it is take a part of your recording where there's no vocal and just noise, and then click learn. You know, in this case there's really no noise, so there's no need to do this, but you will have to click learn and then, you know, adjust the threshold and reduction, and this will hopefully remove all the noise there is. With the preamp, it's there to kind of give the vocal a little bit of a boost, a little bit of character, a little bit of analog feeling, and also to just compress it a little bit to make sure its volume is more leveled and there are like no extreme volume peaks. My favorite preamp to use is this UAD Avalon. The real Avalon is just the MVP of preamps, in my opinion at least. But yeah, if I turn this on, it won't do much. Like,
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds, yeah,
1 to 2 dB, and that's already a lot. You can also just use this below 1 dB, but I know a lot of people don't have this, so I got a very great free alternative, which is this Acoustica Eminence. Now this also got a really good sounding EQ, and then this compressor right here.
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds. I just throw back off a Roxy. Quit the talking. Sipping on red and I can't stop it. Walking outside at home, I'm shopping.
It's barely doing anything right here, but it's more so to just add a little bit of flavor, a little bit of analog feeling. Since we're looking at this waveform, you can see that the volume of the vocal is already pretty consistent throughout. If it isn't, you can either manually turn down very loud parts of the vocal or use Vocal Rider, which I'm not gonna go over in this video, but if you're interested in it, just look it up, how to use Vocal Rider to make sure that your vocal is level at all times. Another preamp alternative or add-on you can use is this Q Clone, which is another very cool plugin most of y'all probably don't know about, which is just emulating analog EQ curves. So, you know, even with tapes or compressors, they have some sort of EQ curve as well, you know, altering the sound, which can sound good on some vocals, can not sound good on others. But yeah, definitely try this plugin out. But with that being said, let's move on to the second chapter, the vocal chain. But now before I get into it, I gotta say that the vocal chain is the one thing that changes the most in every mix. But I'm gonna go over my thought process of using every plugin so you can just better understand why I use certain stuff and what I would maybe use in different scenarios. The first thing, which always is the same, this general EQ. I use this SSL native channel strip. You can also use the waves one. Basically just an EQ that looks like this, boosting the highs, usually around like 6 to 8, 9k hertz. And then with these two, it's really just different all the time. With this blue one, 2k hertz is something great to take away from most vocals. And then with this green one, it really depends. Most of the time I boost with this though, just a little bit. I just do like this and then, you know, search for a frequency that I like. Maybe adjust this a little bit and then, you know, just dial in like 1, 2, 3 dB max with this. Just to kind of boost stuff I like about the vocal and remove stuff I don't like about the vocal, but in a very like smooth and not too extreme way. Now next up, I got another EQ and doing more surgical cuts and boosts this time. And you don't have to use like 20 EQ bands like me, especially if you're starting out with mixing. I would suggest to only do like 3 or 4, you know, surgical cuts, meaning searching for very specific annoying frequencies and then taking them out, either like that or, you know, with a dynamic EQ for like stuff that is not like an extremely annoying frequency you completely want to get rid of, but more so something you want to tame a little bit and maybe boost some parts just a little bit. Another cool thing you can play around with is the scale thing down here to, you know, adjust the amount of EQ you're doing on all bands. And another important thing to mention is that when I do these cuts, I always have the whole vocal chain, like everything on. This is a template, so this always is preloaded when I start mixing, so I can hear what my vocal cuts and boosts do in the full context of the whole song. And I also come back and adjust this in different stages of my mixing process. So I may go over this again, you know, before I start mastering, or just in whatever point in my mixing stage where I just think that the vocal could be a little bit cleaner. If we go over these, obviously taking a little bit of the lows out, not taking anything out in this like 200 to 500 range, which I'm gonna probably do later on, but this is a range where you have to be very careful, since especially vocals that are recorded with cheaper mics don't have a lot of these frequencies, and if you then cut those out, your vocal will start to lose a lot of body, which you don't want. For beginners, this might sound good, you know, to cut, but be very careful with it because you might remove all the body from your vocal and then it won't sound full no more. Like, this is really annoying. I'm even cut this a little bit more, honestly, but also this, like, that's just my way of EQing, like general EQ, then some clinical EQ, and then a de-esser, which isn't really de-essing since it's set to very low frequency, but it's more so just cutting out like a really annoying part of the vocal. And that's what I usually do with this first de-esser. Set the frequency to around 4 to 6, 7k, searching for that like really annoying frequency range that I just want to kind of like tame a little bit. Now while I'm mixing the main vocal, I usually have all the effects on so I can just like hear how it affects the whole mix, and then still mixing these stages that I'm going over in this video, perfecting all the plugins, removing plugins, adding different plugins, you know, changing settings. But for now I'm gonna
turn off all the plugins
so you can hear what every plugin adds, starting with this virtual mix rack.
I'm throwing dozen hundreds, yeah, I make it.
Virtual channel right here, just adding a little bit of analog warmth. Then this first compressor in the chain, an 1176, doing barely any compression, like 1 dB. Then just a little bit of saturation with this London saturator, and a little bit of thickness with this revival. And these EQs are off, but you could gain stage with these EQs or boost cut just a little bit. Then another compressor, another compressor, and another compressor. As y'all can see, I use 4 compressors in this because virtual compressors sound the best when used very slightly, but I still want a lot of compression here, so I just have to use these many compressors to make the compression sound good in digital format. When you use a real 1176, you can easily push it to like 7 to 10 dB of compression on a vocal and it will sound good. But with digital compressors like this one, it won't sound good if you do that. Around 3 dB of compression with this one, then RVox.
Pop out at your function.
The RVox sounds really good on some vocals and bad on others. Just try them out with all these compressors.
I'm throwing a dozen hundreds.
This is actually doing quite a lot, like almost 5 dB of compression, but I guess it just worked. This style of song just required a lot of compressions. That's why I did quite a lot here. Just play them on with all the compressors you got. Next up, I got the absolute cheat code craziest plugin. It's not CLA vocals. It is this Clariphonic DSP Mark II, which just has this focus and clarity knob. You know, you really don't quite know what this is, like some sort of compression, EQ, parallel thing, but it sounds so good and there's no skill required. You just have to turn this clarity knob up and listen to how good the vocal sounds after putting this on. Like,
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds. Yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds.
Bro, this is, I still can't believe to this day how good this plugin is. It's truly insane. Like, it adds such a clean high end. Next up, I got this Saturn for some extra saturation. I always play around with the mix down here. I got this console drive preset. I just go through the presets, or sometimes I just like use the default settings and then warm tape, turn this up a little bit, maybe make like 3 bands and then like play around with the band levels. Next up, I just got a little bit of a high end boost again with this Killsoft EQ, which is really cool because it has like different types of EQ bands. Tone stack, I use this EQ, I don't even know what this EQ is emulating, but it just sounded very clean. And then another EQ to just treat the vocal again. You can also go ahead and go back and work on this EQ again, but I personally like to just have a clean blank EQ again where I can then take or cut things out without having to worry about all the other cuts or boosts I made earlier. Adding a little bit of body with this. This is just some kind of annoying stuff I found. I kind of like dynamically EQ'd it, so it just kind of gets tamed just a little bit. Then I found this really annoying frequency right here, which can sometimes be the case. Most of the time, honestly, the vocal is good and you don't have to do these like drastic cuts. You know, I rarely do those, but in this case, if you hear this frequency, you know why I cut this out. You don't want that, like, at all. Now next, I got another virtual mix rack. Again, just adding a little bit of body. Now, as you was able to see and hear throughout the vocal chain, I always added just a little bit of body, a little bit of, you know, low end to the vocal in very small but many steps. I first used these plugins right here, then added a little bit of low end with this, and then now again another instance of this revival, you know, to just kind of cancel out the digitalness of those plugins to make the end result as best as possible. Same as with the EQ and same as with the compression. I just found that achieving something you want with a vocal in multiple steps throughout the chain just sounds the best. Instead of just throwing one plugin on there, completely like maxing it out and calling it a day. That just won't sound good in the digital world of mixing. Now, you might have heard that you shouldn't overcomplicate your mixes with like using too many plugins, which makes sense considering that a lot of, especially like new beginner mixing engineers, just have a lot of plugins at their disposal nowadays and just throw everything on there they can think of. But if you really know what all the plugins you use do, it makes way more sense to just use a bunch of plugins, all doing just a little bit instead of just like using 5 plugins, pushing them all to the max. You know, that won't sound good. So we're finally through with the vocal chain. Let's talk about effect sense, making your vocal 3D and smoothing out your vocal. Now, the first thing you can do to kind of widen up your vocal is using a flanger. I like to use this air flanger since this is the original flanger Seth Ferguson used, who created this mixing technique / effect. Now, usually I turn the mix down to about like 5%, but in this kind of redder super trap genre, a lot of flanger is really part of the vocal effect. So
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds. Yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. I should throw back off a Roxy. Quit the talking.
Another plugin that can add a little bit of 3D stereo widening without actually stereo widening is this plugin called CLA Echosphere, which has like a slap delay and a plate reverb, which I just blend in by a few percent. Now again, I kind of did a lot with these 7.3% in this song, but again, in this kind of super trap genre, the vocal has to be very 3D. For like more general like hip hop, rap, trap songs, you can tone that down a little bit, having it at like 3%.
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds. Yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. Me and bro stay locked in. Me and bro stay locked in.
Now you would barely be able to hear it, especially with like all the other effects going on that we gonna get to now. But all in all, everything will just add up at the end to give you the best possible result. Now before we get into all the effect sense, I have to play out the song without all the effect sense and with it. And you can just hear how much those add. Like,
I'm throwing a dozen hundreds, yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. I just threw back off of Roxy, quit the talking. Me and bro stay locked in. Me and bro stay locked in. Me and sipping on red and I can't stop it.
now again, with this type of genre, the vocal has to sound very 3D, so I used a lot of different scents and a lot of different effects, even automating them to just add more movement into the track. But first, if you don't know how to set up those scents, you will have to open up Fruity Scent. I just renamed all these Fruity Scents, and then sidechain those to different mixer tracks. So I have this vocal chain right here, and then also have all these scents up here sidechained to my vocal chain. Plus, all of these scents go to this effect plus, which then goes back into all music. So I can, you know, edit all the effects themselves and also solo all the effects. So if I only want to hear the effects, I can also like mute all the effects with just muting this. So I would strongly suggest you to set this up that way, so it's routed the exact same way as in Pro Tools. Now also, if you don't know, the reason why we use these scents and not just like put reverb on our vocal chain directly is because that would just alter the sound and alter the original mix of your vocal. You know, with doing these scents, you'll send out your vocal to a separate mixer track, which duplicates the signal, which you then can affect individually again and blend in with the original. But yeah, as you can see, I got quite a lot of different effect scents here. First of all, just a normal reverb. When I want a more subtle reverb, I use this Eventide SP 2016. And when I want something more big, I use the 7.7. I usually use the like chamber or hall presets here and like low cut it on, which is very important, 100% mix. Since it's a send, everything you put on the send has to be at 100% mix. You know, it would create some phasing issues. Low cut it here since I don't want like any low reverb, which again is another very useful thing about sends. If you don't want any low end from the reverb, you know, just cut it out. Or just like EQ the reverb, like this, just EQs the reverb. Next, pretty simple, a delay. Not much more to say here. You know, very simple. Turn this analog off. I even got like a little bit of reverb right here, like kind of like a very short reverb. I guess it's kind of just like smooth out the delay. And then again, EQing this, you know, taking the lows out. Basic stuff so far. But next, I got these three very important scents that add so much to the vocal. First, we got parallel compression, which is always a cheat code because it doesn't make your vocal louder, but make it feel like it's louder. So let's just turn all these off so you can really hear what this parallel compression does.
I'm throwing a dozen hundreds, yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. I just throw back off of Roxy, quit the talking.
Now you can use basically any compressor on here. Recently I really like this DBX 160. This is a more smooth alternative, also sounds good. Now you can really use whatever you want. Just use a normal compressor, normal ratio. Some people may tell you that you should use a very high ratio on a parallel comp, but to me it doesn't sound really good. Like it just gets too compressed, and when blending it in, it's not really matching up with the main vocal. Yeah, I used to do that too, but now I'll stick to like normal ratios. Now the only downside with parallel compression is that it will add a lot of annoying frequencies in your vocal. Like if I would turn this up,
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing a dozen hundreds, yeah, I make it.
So to counter that, I just do very heavy EQing on this channel and just like take out everything. Like do very extreme EQing to just smoothen out the parallel compression as much as possible. If something is just harsh on some of these scents, just like heavily de-ess it or heavily EQ it. Now the next two scents add a lot of like 3D-ness to the vocal again. First being the stereo slap, which is just a very short delay, and then just another EQ. Again, just like taking out high end. As you was able to see with all these sends, I mostly took out high end on every single one of them. Doubling things up in the high end will just create annoying, nizzly, harsh sounds that you don't want. But to the last end of the main vocal, we got a doubler right here. Very simple doubler. Even some stereo separation with this trick I showed you earlier. And some more de-essing again to just, you know, smoothen out the double. And some crazy cueing again.
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing dozen hundreds.
I'm gonna just turn all of these effects on one after another so you can really hear what all these do to the vocal.
At your function. I'm throwing dozen hundreds. Yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. I just threw back off of Roxy. Quit the talking. Me and bro stay locked in.
I even forgot this one. This is just like a deep doubler that comes in by automation sometimes. But there's nothing really to it, you know. Same thing as with the other doubler.
I pop out at your function. I'm throwing dozen hundreds. Yeah, I make 1,000 hundreds. I just threw back off of Roxy. Quit the talking.
And then what I also forgot is this ghost effect right here. Just a reverse reverb. But yeah, that's everything about effects and sends. Now let's get to the mistake a lot of beginner engineers make, which is having the vocal not fit into the beat properly. How I don't make that mistake is what I'm gonna show y'all next. So going from this vocal chain, I route that to the all vocals, where no background vocals and sings and stuff like that goes to as well. As I said at the beginning, I picked a very simple song which doesn't have any like real ad-libs or like doubling stuff. But if y'all want to know, basically on my ad-lib channel right here, almost the same thing as with like the main vocal. I just have it, you know, filtered out a little bit more, a little bit of a microshift here, then go in here to this sing ad-lib bus, even more EQing, some de-essing again, panning, reverb send, delay send, stereo send, and then also go into all vocals. And then with like doubles, you know, it's almost the same thing. But anyways, getting back to how to make sure your vocals are tucked in into the beat, glued together with the beat, which all starts with this all vocals chain, where again all vocals come together. When I first use the SSL bus compressor to do around 2 dB of compression to just like tuck all the vocals in a little bit, I always use the settings like this. All vocals is like almost always the same, so this is really something you can just like copy and use every time.
You ain't get no rest, you dumb. I finna swipe, I call me some dumbs. Rockin' Virgil line, rockin' no dunks. Rockin' St. Louis.
The first step to then making sure your vocal sits nicely in your beat is a quite advanced technique using this EQ right here. First of all, cutting out everything over 16k hertz since we don't need that, and cutting out everything below 82 hertz since, you know, some plugins in between may have added, you know, some low end again. Then using this stereo EQ right here, making sure that this below is in mono and also up here is in mono, and then adjusting these two bands to the key of your beat. In this case, the beat is in F, so we have this at F and this also at F. If you don't see this, you have to turn on this piano down here. You know, now it just shows the hertz, and with this, you know, it also shows the key. You can play around with having this at F7 or F6, whatever sounds best. And then as the last plugin on the vocals, I got this L1 limiter on these exact same settings since years. It just works. And if the vocal is still kind of like too wild and not tame, you can use this FabFilter Pro Q on this single vocal enhancement preset and then play around with the mix right here.
Rockin' Virgil line, rockin' no dunks. Rockin' St. Louis on fire with Eric. Smart that boy in the motherfucking spliff.
But we're not done here, since to make sure that the vocal fit into the beat, we also have to obviously do some work on the beat. So what I always do first is using again another console EQ. I just use this BX one. You can again just like use the SSL one or Waves one, whatever you feel like sounds the best or whatever you have. And then I do pay attention to what kind of conflicts with the vocal. I usually do this at the beginning of the mix. I have like the vocal playing too with the beat, and then just
that drug. My money jump. You ain't get no rest, you dumb.
When boosting this, like the vocal really gets drowned and has like no place anymore. Same with this probably.
That drug. My money jump. You ain't get no rest, you dumb. I'm finna swipe, I call me some dumb.
You can really hear that it's clashing crazy with the vocals.
That drug. My money jump. You ain't get no rest, you dumb. I'm finna swipe,
like when taking it out, the vocal has all the plays in the world. And then again, same as with the vocal, I go and do some more surgically cueing afterwards, taking some annoying frequencies out. And then as the last plugin on here, I just got an imager, just making sure that the bass is completely mono. I usually have this like first band to about like 140, and then kind of like stereo separate, you know, the high end a little bit, depending on how I'm feeling, to just kind of bring out the beat a little bit again. Now when I have my initial mix done, I usually, you know, take a break for a few hours, let the song sit, let the song rest, and then go back and kind of listen for mistakes, listen for things I may have not noticed along the way or like forgot, and like go back and maybe do some adjustments to some compressors, some gain changes, some EQ changes, just really listening in on what I don't like about the mix and thinking of ways to fix that. For example, right here on the all vocals, I added like another de-esser because I really did not de-ess anything on here, which is very untypical. I usually, you know, put a de-esser on this vocal chain. Then when I'm satisfied with the mix, I like to export the beat and the vocals out individually, then create a new arrangement up here and put like beat and the vocal on 2 different channels to start mastering. Now the reason I do this is so I can still level out the volume of the beat and the vocal very easily, because when it gets to like the mastering process and you hear the song very loud and very pushed and limited, you will often notice that the vocal or beat was too loud or too present. And the reason why I'm exporting those first is because I just like to have like a clean slate, you know, just something clean to work with. Like I do overthink a lot, so what helps me is just export it and I will work with what I have exported, which is just, you know, the full vocal and the full beat, so I can't really change anything anymore. So that's all I do right here, you know, just lowering the beat, lowering the vocal, gain staging it, and EQing just like some very minor things that I find after adding all the limiting and all the things on the master. So quickly going over the master chain, I first obviously have to have an EQ. Now on the master at least, I make sure that this is set to natural phase. You should do this with every EQ free, but I just sometimes forget it and it does not make like a huge difference. Now this EQ sometimes looks much more complicated, but here I was really satisfied with the mix, so I just did really small cuts and boosts and brick walled everything over 16 kHz because we don't need anything above that. Then a soothe, pretty low settings here. You know what soothe does. You have to be very careful with soothe though, especially on the master, since it can take out like the whole life, the whole character of the mix if you use it like too extensively. I'll give her about these stupid hoes, I'm way too old. I'll give her about that bill like in my kids right up. Then, because I didn't do enough de-essing, but didn't want to go back, I just used this vice de-esser, which is a mastering de-esser as it says right here, and it just sounds so smooth and so clean. This is really the only like mastering de-esser I know of that sounds great. Just does a little bit, as you can see up here. I can't find no bit that drunk. My money. Then next up, some multi-band compression, which you also have to be very careful with, but if you use it in a slight way, it can again really help to glue everything together. Almost not even touching the bass, but kind of taming it a little bit. It's also like barely doing anything. If there's like a present kick here, I usually add like another band right here on the same settings as the bass band. Next up, we got another EQ. To just clean up the mix again. If you want a more rougher mix that isn't like completely extremely clean, you probably should do this. But when mastering, you always have to keep in mind that even little EQ boosts will sound bad most of the time because everything is just so loud. So keep that in mind and don't just like cut everything all of a sudden because it doesn't sound good. Then we use an ozone for a little bit of master EQing. This is kind of like a smiley EQ, very slight smiley EQ. Then some dynamic EQ, which I really like in ozone. It just sounds extremely clean and it helps a lot with removing too present frequency ranges. Like this is just too present. It doesn't necessarily sound bad, but maximize the next. Pretty self-explanatory on these settings right here. Limiting it, making it louder, having the ceiling right here at 0.1 dB, very important. Continuing with limiting, we got L2 on here. You can play around with these styles. Usually I use modern or transparent, and with this out thing right here, you should again put this at minus 0.0.1 since it's not the last limiter in the chain. But before we get to that, I use limiters.
Fuck my kidneys up. I don't give a fuck about these stupid hoes, I'm way too up.
And then, as the last limiter, put the output gain at minus 0.7. Just boost it a little bit more right here, and just increase the volume a little bit more in here. This invisible limiter is just great. Like this limiter, just as the name says, is like literally invisible. Like it just makes it louder and adds no artifacts, no nothing whatsoever. So this is really my favorite one to use at the end of the chain to just make sure everything is loud enough. Now if we now check with Insight.
Fuck my kidneys up. I don't give a fuck about these stupid hoes, I'm way too up.
We get a nice like minus 9.7, 9.5. I could push it a little bit further. Minus 9 is usually the sweet spot, but minus 10 is also cool. Obviously, you know, don't mix your tracks to minus 14 LFS just because streaming services say you have to, but you probably knew that already. And yeah, that's it. That's how mix and master a song from start to finish in FL Studio. I'm sure this video helped a lot of y'all. And if you a producer that never really got into mixing, I would strongly suggest you to do so. Especially when starting out, it can be a very great way of making money, especially if you already are connected to like artists, sending them beats and stuff. Make sure you actually get good though. Get your reps in, you know, and then start to charge people. And even if you end up only doing a few mixes or only getting into it like a little bit, it will still indirectly help you with producing, because it learns you why something sounds good or why something works and why something doesn't work and stuff like that. Like it can be very helpful. Yeah, with all that being said, my FL mixing template with all the things I showed in this video is available on my Patreon. I truly appreciate you if you're still watching. Let me know if you have any questions about mixing in the comments. And what else? You know what to do. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to not miss these videos. And see ya next week. I'm out.